Well, let's start with the police and the latest story that's led to questions being raised about trust. This week, the year-long row over Plebgate exploded back into life with allegations that 3 police officers were less than honest about a meeting with Andrew Mitchell. John, what's been going on?
Well, I mean, this story, Stephen, has been stewing. It's been bubbling. And this week it started to actually boil over. What happened? Well, there was a statement from the Independent Police Complaints Body. And Deborah Glass, the Deputy Chair of the Police Complaints Commission, said that she simply disagreed with a decision by police not to act against their own, not to act against officers, in particular from the Police Federation, who went to see Andrew Mitchell after the row in number 10 Downing Street, where he was accused of calling them effing plagues, which of course he denied. The Prime Minister said they had not told the truth. He backed Deborah Glass and said there should be action against them. And he said that the Independent Police Complaints Commission had really actually done exactly the right thing, and now Andrew Mitchell was owed an apology. It opened up the question, many questions, but among them, basic questions of trust in the police, Stephen.
Really important, obviously, and it's not just Plebgate that is evidential of this, that is raising concerns about the integrity of the police, is it?
No, that's so. I mean, this one is a particularly sharp and pointed issue, but it's not so long since we had the argument, the row, the long-running row over Hillsborough. Police in large numbers, in an enormous number of statements, accused of falsifying what actually happened at the Hillsborough disaster over a period. Systematic misleading, blackening the name of people there, causing a campaign against them, which has now, some say, been vindicated by what came out over Hillsborough. There's, of course, the G20 demonstration, you recall, a couple of years back. Accusations of police excessive conduct in policing that. And it has all arguably had an effect on trust in the police, and the Plebgate affair maybe more than any other. Let's talk now to Michael Meacher, Labour MP for Oldham West and Royston. Mike Pannett's with us too. He's a former police officer who served 10 years in the Met, another 10 with North Yorkshire. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening, John.
Can I come to you first, Mike? Look, with your police experience, looking at your now, well, former colleagues and present colleagues, there's no denying, Mike, is there, that trust in the police has been severely dented and fractured by the Plebgate affair?
Look, I think it's not only the Plebgate affair. We've also had, being drip-fed all the bad things about Hillsborough, undercover cops. It's a constant sort of drip-feeding of bad news. And, of course, a lot of police officers who are serving now weren't even born when Hillsborough took place. But let's be absolutely clear here, John. The police are not manifestly corrupt. There's tens of thousands of police officers doing an extremely challenging and dangerous job day in and day out. And it's been constantly undermined by some elements of the very hostile press and politicians that we've seen just recently. And only tonight, let's not forget, there's the Police Bravery Award. So we're looking at a tiny minority of police officers who have made mistakes over the years, who they are the very people who need to be held to account for whatever's gone wrong. And, of course, now we're dealing with the Plebgate situation. And let's, again, be right. Those 2 original officers on the gates of number 10, they haven't been arrested, and their integrity, as far as I can see, is totally intact. What's happened afterwards is, in some respects, the following incident when I call a rogue officer, for whatever reason, and hopefully that'll be sorted out, has said something which wasn't right. And then the incident in the Midlands, Deborah Glass has come out very quickly and said there's issues there. And, of course, the Home Secretary and Prime Minister have immediately jumped up and down and put a whole swathe against the entire police service. But
I'm not sure they did that. They didn't do that,
out.
did they, Mike? And the Prime Minister supported Deborah Glass, and Deborah Glass backed up her original account by telling us, well, there was an investigation into that meeting between Andrew Mitchell and those Police Federation officers, and the investigation recommended disciplinary action. It was their chiefs who overruled it. I mean, there is a question here. It's a question, not a statement, but the question is, are the Police Federation in some cases acting as a sort of law unto themselves?
Well, I think, things could have been potentially handled better. But if we look at the facts and the facts alone, I think we've got 3 independent chief constables who are going to be going down to meet Keith Vaz, the Home Affairs Select Committee chairman, and the Select Committee, because they're absolutely 100% that the police officers involved in that meeting with Andrew Mitchell have done nothing wrong.
Well,
now,
we'll see what they have to say. It may well be a difficult time for them, that's clear. I mean, you mentioned the officers in the original incident in Downing Street. Look, we'll see what the Director of Public Prosecutions has to say about all of that. There may be, a finding conceivably that says, look, I can't resolve this. There's a conflict of evidence, which, may just be hanging in the air. It won't be the end of the argument, though. But Michael Meacher, listening to all of this, where do you think trust in the police has been left?
Well, I entirely agree that the vast majority of police officers are carrying out a very difficult and sometimes dangerous job on behalf of all of us, and we very much support them. The real problem is, and it may only be a small minority of cases, but it is very serious if the police are found not to have been telling the truth, to have been falsifying evidence, as they did in the case of Hillsborough, and actually impugning the reputations of those who died. I mean, that is a dreadful incident. In the case of Tomlinson, in the G20, the original police claim was that Tomlinson died of a heart attack, but the fact is he was violently pushed by PC Harwood. That was concealed, and it only came to light because by chance a Canadian businessman happened to take pictures of the incident in his iPhone and gave it to the press. In the case of Stephen Lawrence, it is very distressing that the investigation of the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence was bedeviled by institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police, and it was found that the police investigation into that murder, and I quote the words, was marred by a combination of professional incompetence, institutional racism, and a failure of leadership by senior officers. Then we come to this incident of Plebgate, as it's called. The fact is, there were two aspects to this, quite apart from what actually did happen. What followed was the meeting with the three senior police officers on Federation who said they wanted to clear the air. What they said afterwards, that Andrew Mitchell continued to refuse to elaborate on what happened, well, he'd actually kept a record of it so that we know the truth. Yeah. That he had used it to outline his central defence, that he had sworn, he admitted in the presence of officers, which he, of course, shouldn't have done, but he insisted that he did not use the word pleb.
It makes you think, Michael, does it not, just how vulnerable, it's Stephen, by the way, it makes you think just how vulnerable the whole system is, because the default system in court cases up and down the land, every single day of the week, must be that a police officer's word carries an enormous amount of weight when they are giving evidence against an ordinary man in the street.
I totally agree with you. I absolutely 100% agree that it is exceedingly important that is what people feel, and that is what I want to feel. But I have to say, in the light of these, if it wasn't just one incident, it would be easier to pass it over. But there have been at least half a dozen incidents. I mean, there's the phone hacking incident, which we haven't mentioned, the undercover activity against environmental activists, which involves sexual liaisons without their knowing. I mean, the impact of this on police integrity is worrying.
But the point I'm trying to...
Sorry, can I just say this?
Of course.
Finally, I mean, the aim is not to blacken the police. Far from it. It is to ensure that the truth always comes out, even when it is unpleasant, even when it's difficult, even when people have made mistakes. And everyone recognises people make mistakes. But rather than trying to cover them up and then being found out, that is very worrying. And we need the police to be believed.
The point I'm trying to get to here is the vulnerability that is inherent in the system. These are obviously high-profile cases because the media has paid attention to them. You take the ordinary cases that there must be thousands of throughout the country. Even take basic ones like, a police officer observing someone going through a red traffic light. There aren't lots of witnesses. It may be a police officer's word against a motorist. And again, it is built into the system, Mike Pannett, that when that police officer is in court saying what he saw, he's bound to be believed beyond an ordinary citizen.
Absolutely, Stephen. Look, just to quickly come back to what Michael Meach is saying, he said, look, of course we want a police source that we can trust. The police are there to represent the public. They recruit from society. And goodness me, the 99.99% of the decent men and women of this country do not want to be working with corrupt officers. I think I've given interviews on everything from Hillsborough to Plebgate to the undercover cops to the G20. You know, I put my head in my hands, as did the entire police service when we witnessed what happened at G20. That officer shouldn't have even been in the police service. Every police officer just looked at it and thought, oh, we do not want this. And that's what the individuals, you see, this is what we find happens. As soon as something goes wrong, it's the entire police, it's the police service that seem to be affected. It is damaging the decent men and women of this country who are out there doing a really, really tough job with people who often despise them because they're disrupting their criminal activities. It is not an easy job, but I do agree we must always get the absolute competence of the police. But Hillsborough's to be investigated. There's going to be one or two individuals there, the frontline officers, the 180 of which about 30 or 40 of them were from Liverpool, that were there, did their best in dreadful circumstances, and that will all come out in the inquiry.
The lines are open now, 0500 909 693. Question time starting on BBC One, and indeed we play it in full here on this network as it's broadcast live, starting very, very shortly indeed, 10 or 15 minutes time. The phone lines are open now. Can we trust the police in this country? George in Durham, what do you think? First call of the night.
Hello, Stephen. Well, the first point I would like to make is the Plebgate affair has been going on for quite some time now. I think the longer it rolls on, the less trust that the public will have in the police force. And as regards my area, we have like a laddered structure where we have the police at the top, then you have the PCSOs underneath them, the neighbourhood wardens, and then the neighbourhood coordinators where we are. Now, we need to trust those rungs of the ladder all the way to the top to be able to do our jobs properly and live without any fear of any repercussions. What would happen if this drags on and drags on is you'll find that the PCSOs and then the neighbourhood wardens will be tainted as well as the police, all the way down, and then your neighbourhood watch coordinator, who is the lifeblood to a lot of policing now, because there's not the numbers on the streets, will be left in the lurch, basically. I mean, we're reporting the crime, most of the crime, for them.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I think it would be a very good thing if it's true to a close. All that one is saying about Plebgate is it is extremely unfortunate. Two incidents. One is that there appears to have been a very contrary view given of that meeting by the three police officers, which now appears to be quite untrue. And even more important, today it is announced that the Independent Police Complaints Commission found that the three forces had watered down the conclusions of an earlier investigation. I mean, it is very unhelpful when that happens. Things do go wrong. People do make mistakes, but we should admit it and come up with our hands up. And then I think it would be much more accepted. We'd have much greater trust in the police if that happened.
Yeah, Mike Pannett, listening to this, as a police veteran, I mean, you'll remember from the beginning of your police career over 20 years ago, there was a culture that was associated with the police, especially larger forces, West Midlands, London, the Metropolitan Police and so on, where a number of officers were thought to have been, let's say, creative in presenting their evidence in a fairly systematic sort of way, the sort of behaviour we saw set out in dramas like Ashes to Ashes. How far has that really changed, do you think?
I think it's changed tremendously. You know, let's face it, if you were a racist or a homophobic or you want to be corrupt, you know, the last place you want to be now is in our modern day police service, the Metropolitan Police. And you know, going back to Michael Meacher there about what's on with the Lawrence inquiry, you know, to make this sweeping statement that the police are, systematically racist. Well, I felt like thousands of other officers did when that happened, that dreadful incident happened to Stephen Lawrence. To be suddenly branded, like we all were, as a racist really was quite upsetting. But the Metropolitan Police, above anybody else, I think, have moved heaven and earth to get things right.
And what about cooking up evidence there, Mike? The idea of, just getting your notebook out and just embellishing it here, adding a quote there, just making a case that suits you.
I think, going back to the Gene Hunt days, and you've seen all the, the types of things that people believe police got up to. Of course, I always refer to the 99.99% of the decent men in this country doing a fantastic job. There always is, and has been, one or two bad apples that nobody wants to work with. But
we don't know if it's one or two bad apples.
Well, I tell you what, you get caught.
Not know.
You get caught, Stephen. I'm telling you now, and you have found out the sentences for serving police officers are harsh, and quite rightly so.
Okay, Mark's in Manchester. Hello, Mark.
Good evening.
What do you think, Mark?
I think we're really splitting hairs over the word plebs. At the end of the day, this man in the highest land, he's in government, and he swore at a police officer. That's an offence, and for a man in his position, he should have lost his job for that alone. It's irrelevant.
Well, so a man that admits to doing it, that mumbles it under his breath, his career's over.
Not any man, but any man on the street would have got a caution for that, right? He's in government.
Actually, you go out on a Saturday night, and I would argue that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women probably doing a lot worse verbally with the police, and not one of them get cautions. Have you seen these town centres on a Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday night? There's absolutely no way the police are arresting or cautioning people who mumble a swear word at them. The jails would be full.
If you mouth off to a police officer, you do face the risk. I'm not saying you always will, but you do face the risk of getting cautioned, definitely.
OK. Listen, thank you very much. Mike and Michael, thank you. 26 minutes.